Welcome to the 2-month review, a weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which for the next 10 episodes, we'll be doing a deep dive on Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright, a book that just came out from New Directions on February 6th. I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
That was a extremely mediocre opening for
Well, that's
our first
not the
episode.
opening, though. That's not the opening. The opening is our newest game, Facts You Didn't Know About Australia. So did you know that Australia has the longest golf course in the world?
The longest golf course in the world.
The longest golf course. It
Of
is.
course I know that. It's what?
It is 1,365 kilometers long, which is fucking nonsense. So it's all kind of I hate golf. I'm going to say a lot of controversial stuff at the beginning of this episode, and my dislike of golf is one part of it. I think golf sucks, and I don't want to play it. My dad's livelihood and subsistence growing up was based on golf, which maybe makes this kind of like even a little ruder, but I'm not a fan. So when I found out that they had the longest one, I thought, well, that's another reason I don't know that I want to visit Australia. I don't want to get eaten by a bug. I don't want to.
Fun fact that goes with that is their greatest national export is Greg Norman. So there you go.
That's true, right? Yeah. So this golf course is like located along a highway, crosses two states and the Nullarbor Plain. It is set up so that there are roadhouses. It's like if you were driving, you would drive and play a hole of golf and then drive to the next hole, and which is like a roadhouse. So you're getting increasingly drunk on Fosters and playing golf. Each of these holes, it's 18 holes, 72 par 72. I think is normal ? They all have names to them, and the names are like Wombat Hole, Dingo's Den, Nullarbor Nymph, Eagle's Nest, 90 miles straight. There's one that has a Wikipedia entry of its own called Skylab, which feels like something out of a Terminator movie. But yeah, so Australia, lots of bugs, big ass spiders, and the longest golf course in the world.
Honey, I'm going to go golfing. Okay, I'll see you next week.
They said that it says it opened 20.
You have to have your oil changed. Your golf cart has to have its oil changed. For the tires rotated by the third hole.
They say that like 20,000 people. Skylab crashed in Australia, which is maybe where that name comes from. So 20,000 people played this course, and then they believe that an equal amount, if not more, have illegally played it by not paying any fees, because how are you going to
know?
Kilometer long
like drones. That's wild.
What a ridiculous idea. So
have you seen the beer cart person? About 4 days ago. I don't know if they're going to come back around, though.
I mean, this is the land where babies have been eaten by dingoes, and I wouldn't be surprised if golfers were now as well. So there's that. I also want to announce to everyone who's watching or listening that we have a ton of books that just came in. So Open Letter had a little bit of a hiccup in terms of getting books published because of personal reasons, and then printer problems, and then distributor issues, which I am legally not supposed to be talking about, so I won't, but let it be noted that our distributor screwed up bits and pieces of this. If you're a subscriber, you're getting 3 books in the mail right now, and we have entered into our black phase. So we have Dubravka Greshik's newest book, The Culture of Lies, black and white cover. Did This Hand Kill by, I'm going to try it, Cezary Lazarus? Don't know.
Nailed it.
This is a great Polish true crime novel. Or reportage, work of Polish reportage. And then The Red Handler by Johan Harstad, which is branded as Open Letter Pulp. Like we have our own detective logo and like a detective crime book for once. So this is Norwegian, also black, white, and red. We are in a deep black and white and red phase, which is
who translated that last book?
The Red Handler. This is by David Smith. Translated this one.
Okay.
Which he was a
that back cover. Hold up that back cover real quick for those that are just listening. It's red with like black blood, almost like oil, as if oil is a bad thing that's destroying our lives.
It actually looks a lot like chocolate too.
Okay.
Maybe make you a little hungry. Solid. But I wanted to bring this up in part, and this is going to be the controversial part, and I want to frame this. I want to frame this as best I can so that you know that I'm not trying to be harsh on anything, because I do think that New Directions has some of the greatest designed books and covers and whole vibe that they can have. But we have had, and this is a bit about maybe in the weeds, but might be of interest to some people. We have had a lot of trouble with printers recently. We have sent off books that were supposed to be matte that come back glossy. There are like miscuts. There are innumerable delays. It's all like a real train wreck of getting things printed. And our distributor really wants us to use a thing called LSI, which essentially would print to order the books. They would never have inventory. They don't want inventory except when they want to charge you for it. They just want you to like have a book in a system. They print the copies that they need. That's it. No inventory, no waste whatsoever. And it's been found that those copies, which we've used them for galleys and certain other books, that there's like a 10 to 12% damage rate on those where it's misprinted, things are miscut, the wrong book is inside there, which is a pretty high percentage. All this is a frame. I wish this book, Praiseworthy, were slightly different in its design.
Why?
First of all, I think that it is too squat. I think it should be a 6x9 book, so it was bigger rather than so thick. It's like an uneasy book to hold, and the page size seems weird given like its overall length. But more importantly, the galley came in, and the galley was all matte. The galley feels amazing to read. I don't like these glossy covers, and I don't know if yours has this, but my back is like off kilter, but on the front there's like missing colors. Like it looks like there's like strips on the front of like a part and then a non-colored part, as if something just went awry. And I'm like, bring this up because we live in a world in which our distributor does not want books to exist. Basically, they just want them as like widgets that they can check for. And bookstores are, there, but like are there in certain ways. And there used to be like, I think of like books as like the ownership of books in one way being like a process of digesting text, which is more or less what I do. I'm not a collector. I don't like have first edition issues or anything like that. I just digest the text. But there are like, I was showing my class, we were doing a thing on production. There are beautifully created objects like this J.J. Abrams book S. It's also called Ship of Theseus, that has like fucking shit side of it, cards and handwritten documents, and is like a truly like something that's like worth owning. And even those Mark Danielus, the familiar, that is series of books, they're like glossy pages, full color on the tips, like bound in bookmark, really interesting die cut cover that's like on an angle, even like really beautiful productions. And I think that like the world that we're living in, my concern is that the world we're living, especially with our distribution like emphasis and their sort of push as to what we're going to, is like letting go of like the beauty of the created book. And this book, given the Alexis Wright's like reputation, I thought was going to be like, I thought it would hardcover first of all, but I thought it would be like this really like, thing.
Well, I do have to say, I'm exact opposite of you. I think this is wonderful. It reminds me of those like Windows 98 books that you would get, or like how to do Excel. So it takes me back to the good old days of how to navigate Microsoft Word and Office Suite. So there's that too.
I can make source. I do like the image. I like the donkey. I like the image. I like the I just feel like whatever. Someone's saying in the chat that the End Other Stories edition is 5x8 with a white matte cover, thick but easier to handle for reading. Which I do believe like with a matte cover makes a big difference. The galley of this had a matte cover. It also had like paper that was slightly thinner, so it didn't feel so like chunky. This thing is a fucking chunky ass book.
Oh man. Yeah, that's like fun nerd stuff that unless you're like really into books, people don't care about this conversation at all. I think it's fascinating. I like to know how it's made, why it's made. Now that I'm into more books than I'm just being a reader, I find that stuff fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For anyone watching this, or I guess for not watching it too, you are frozen. I'm going to remove you and add you back in and see if that makes a difference. Yeah, now you're moving. Oh well, I can hear you with it.
All right, that's fine.
Maybe hear you. So I don't know if there's anything I wanted to talk about before we talk a little bit about this. I think that this one's sort of worrisome for me. Like, this is a book and an author that I know like next to nothing about prior to starting this podcast and deciding that we would be doing this book. And
welcome to
like
my
with the
world.
past,
that's every book.
Almost set myself up for determined failure. But it was a book like I'd heard of Alexis Wright only through the proliferation of discussions about her related to Australian book Twitter. Like there's a huge group of Australian readers who are like into Open Letter, they're into Dalkey Archive stuff, they're into like our podcast, they're into like these sort of books. And they talk about them a lot. They're very active. And really smart and interesting people. And they've always mentioned, along with Gerald Murane, as Alexis Wright being one of the great contemporary Australian writers, full stop, amazing, dense, all over the place, like very like important, very unique in her style, so on and so forth. But like I knew nothing, like literally nothing more than that. Before going into this, except that they loved her and that she was an Aboriginal author. Those are like the two facts, full stop, that I was aware of. Had you
I can
heard
do
of
you
her
one
before?
better. No, I can do you one better. Like all I know about Australia comes from Bluey and Crocodile Dundee. So like forget authors. I don't even know if like they're an actual country. I'm not even sure. I mean, they just changed the continent name. I just caught up with that, a couple weeks ago. So I mean, I'm like an infant wandering into the room. Oh my God. So yeah, I'm gonna have all the strong opinions.
I am the world's only Bluey hater. Like I don't like that show at all. I think that it's a secret. I think secretly, if you were to question Bluey's dad just a little bit, he wants to kill himself, and that everything that he's doing on this show is solely to keep himself from suicide.
Oh man, can you imagine like the dark turn it could take, like if his leash is attached to his collar and it's just like dangling from the back porch, like Bandit, where are you, Bandit? And the mom's trying to hide it from the kids, so they start playing a game with the corpse and like
let's do
no. Yeah.
And he's struggling.
The thing I can't stand about that show is why are these parents always playing with their kids? Sometimes you just like, kids, go away. Like, no, go play with your sister. Go.
And people see this as like the great form of like, oh, this is great parenting. This is like, I can't ever live up to that. I'm like, why would you want to? Like those.
It's a cartoon dog, so you go die. Yeah. I'm not playing with you.
The Bluey exists. I mean, this does tie into part of this, but Bluey exists so that you can put it on the iPad and get rid of your children for 30 minutes. That's what they're there for. That's what it's there for. So I know some Australian authors like Patrick White. And who else? Richard Flanagan. I looked up a list of these and like was like, oh wow. Leanne Moriarty. The Big Little Lies author. I didn't know, never read any of her books. I didn't know that she was Australian. She's on here. Peter Carey.
There's another show coming out.
Oh, really?
You can throw in J.M. Coetzee now. He's still at Adelaide, right?
Oh, perhaps. He's South African. He's true. He represents. James Clavell has that new Shogun show out on FX that started this week. He's also on here. I didn't realize he was Australian. So there are Australian writers I know of, but for the most part, like
Greg Norman's written some books, I'm sure, probably on golf or something. But so that you can throw him on there too.
Called The Great White Shark, 1,065 miles or kilometers of my golfing life. He probably designed
Steve Irwin. Steve Irwin did some writing.
Steve Irwin. Yeah, he did some good stuff, I suppose. He was around. But like weirdly, Australia is like Canada, and I don't mean this as both being like sort of in that same historical bent, but in that like those their authors are there, they're in English, and yet they don't travel very often to American shores. We were doing one John Kinsella is Australian writer that we're publishing through Delkey, but like generally speaking, they're like, they're not made popular here. And it's like one of those like kind of baffling things at the same time is like says something about American like nationalism within the cultural sphere and just disinterest in various parts of the world. But like it's interesting that they're just sort of, cut off. Oh, in addition to Bluey, what about the Simpsons Australia episode? That one's classic. That's a classic.
Oh, the boot with the boot, kick him in the ass. Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah. And the invasive species, the toilet flowing the wrong way.
Yeah.
All the fun stuff. Foster's, where Marge is like, "Can I have a coffee?" And they're like, "Beer." Coffee, a beer. There's no coffee to drink. So I know that, but like, yeah, generally like pretty overlooked. So I know.
Did you ever read the short story First Contact with the Gorgonids?
No.
It takes place in the outback.
Really?
Yeah, that's another, literary Australia reference, but that's a great short story about this guy. He's like an ugly American, and him and his wife, they get told to go out into the middle of nowhere, and they encounter aliens. But the guy's so stupid, he thinks they're Aboriginals. And so he's like, Dancy, come on. He's like trying to film them and stuff. And she's like, maybe you should ask for permission. He's like, permission? Shit. You think people on National Geographic ask for permission? Just like filming them and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a really funny story. It's written by Ursula Le Guin.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, know that one. But
yeah, First Contact with the Gorgon is like super ugly Americans in Australia. It's wonderful.
Amazing. Yeah. So I did a little bit of research, and I was hoping that we can have over the course of these like next 9 episodes, I suppose, some guests come on who are from Australia or have like a greater experience with her writing or with like especially the politics. So there was an article in the New York
would be lovely.
It would be super helpful because like you were saying beforehand, like we'll get to the style of the book itself, but like the general like approach to it sort of requires some ancillary reading to just get a handle on like what the scope of things are, I think. And it's in a way, it made me think when I first started, I read part of her other big book that New Directions released, Carpentaria. And in that too, I had the impression of like, this isn't dissimilar from reading a translation. Like this is a world I'm not automatically familiar with. The language is unique, the style is unique, but like this is the background of like where it's coming from is it feels distinctively foreign in a sense. And so like I'm curious how you approach that just as a general response to the book itself. And like where within the knowledge that you have of Australian literature, Aboriginal politics, like how this kind of lands.
Well, I think for just like jumping into it and reading it, super disorienting the first maybe like 40 pages, right? Yeah. Like trying to get the feel and the flow. It doesn't read like, we'll call it Western, like traditional Western texts. It doesn't feel like that, which I like. Because you get kind of bored with your like smelling your own shit all the time. So it's nice to smell somebody else's. Ew, that's gross. I don't know why they went that way, but sorry.
I mean, there's a lot of talk in this section.
Sure. So it's very disorienting, but like I didn't try to figure anything out, and I actually like not knowing anything because you just let it wash over you and just swim and just figure it out, and that's cool. And I think it's a great way to experience things. Just like, here, check this out. Like no warnings, no orienting. Good luck. And but like you were texting me earlier, like it starts to like click. Like there's like an aha moment where it starts to click right around where we're stopping today, right around like in the 60s when the kids show up. Like, okay, cool. Like I have some footing now. But and first reading it, you mentioned this too. It does remind me of like like indigenous writing from America with names that stand in for something bigger, right?
Yeah.
Symbolic names, and yeah.
Absolutely. And this sort of like the tone and some of the humor felt a little bit like Reservoir Dogs, or Reservation Dogs, I mean. Like a little bit. But yeah, I had that, and the orality of it, I think, was the other. And this isn't to like connect necessarily like in indigenous populations, but there's something to that. And I found an article that was like the feature. It was written on February 4th is when it came out in the New York Times about Alexis Wright, and a little bit about how the title is at 73, Australia's most important Aboriginal writer is making her mark. And it has a bit about like her background. And part of her background was that she went to all of these remote outback towns, and was like employed by the Aboriginal elders to just write down notes at community meetings where people were telling all the stuff about their particular town, and to get that down and write it down. And I assumed it for like various like political reasons, such as like their sovereignty, since Aboriginal people don't have their own sovereign nation, and have been from, without even looking at any sort of research, have been mistreated by the Australian government for hundreds of years. So you can just assume that and know that they've been in Australia for ever, apparently like 60,000 plus years, but like they're not recognized as a group by the government and are mistreated in various ways. So she worked on like that oral part of it, and I think that really comes through and is like a key point here. She says something in here where that part of it was like a training to like, it was good training. They were teaching you to listen, and they were teaching you patience. And I think that that's true within this book too, like mimicking that sort of orality and like the telling. It's very repetitive. There's like long sections that sort of retell what you just told, but like in a slightly different way. Like that, there is like a patience that you need to be able to get into it. And then the other thing that I thought was really noteworthy is that there was, first of all, 4 months ago, they held a nationwide referendum whether they should establish a voice, is what they keep calling it, voice, a constitutionally enshrined body that would advise the Australian government on questions related to Aboriginal affairs. And this referendum was shot down. 60% of the people voted against it. And apparently, like, both, it was like a minor step. It wasn't like accomplishing what the Aboriginal population would have liked, but also the whole campaign to get it passed became like mired in racism, and in various forms of misinformation, which, shocking. Like, we're not going to suffer that for the next fucking 8 months as we like slouch to our apocalypse. But the other thing that's interesting that was mentioned here that does directly tie into the kids section, and that I again, just not aware, and I feel like just ignorant, and like maybe you should know more about Australian history and politics and contemporary stuff, and I don't. But in 2007, there's reports of sexual abuse of Aboriginal children in the Australian news media, and the government imposed the Northern Territory Emergency Response, which they refer to as the intervention. Measures included banning or restricting alcohol sales or pornography, requisitioning land and welfare payments, and stripping back protections for customary law and cultural practice. And the basic vibe behind it was that all these Aboriginal people are just pedophiles and are preying on the Aborigines children, which is again part of this book, but as another like instance of like something that like seemingly wasn't truly accurate and leads to like, banning of liquor and pornography. Like, what the fuck? Like, I would not do well in that sort of.
I've got to have something to live for. Come on.
Really, like, I mean, right now I get out of bed in the morning to watch Jordan Poole low lights, so we're already like pretty low bar for living. But like, take away pornography and booze and woof. But like that the whole treatment there is like such a fundamental part of the beginning of this book. And that's the part where I don't know this, and like you get hints of it. Like you can immediately be like, the white Australian government fucking hates us and doesn't treat us right. I got that, but the level of this that's in here is that's real life happening, and this book is so contemporary. Like, it's so wedded to being a contemporary moment of this moment book, is like really important to kind of know. That is like a backdrop to like figuring out like the relationships and what their sort of like vibe is for their whole culture.
Well, like there's the saying, "Misery loves company." I'm just so happy to hear that there's other countries besides the United States that treat their indigenous population like shit.
Which,
It's not
which,
just a whew. All right, cool.
which you should
It's
mention that
awful.
you are part Native American as well, correct?
Yeah, I have a card carrying or whatever because I look so native, right?
Right.
No, yeah, I mean, I am, and my daughter is. My grandfather was half, so yeah.
Which
But
tribe are you?
Choctaw, they're one of those Trail of Tears tribes.
Yeah.
But what I find like really fascinating that I'm going to kind of keep an eye on, I feel like it's might be kind of integral to the whole book, is this kind of intersection that you're seeing of like, I mean, this first section is called New Gods, but this idea of like Twitter meeting people that are trying to like get back to the roots of, take back the earth and take back the land, like take back and seeing this intersection of like progress and like how progress is destroying things. And then how do you leverage and how do you change, like adapting with those things that are, that are destroying you and using them for something else. So like, I think that seems really interesting. And then this idea of like things that are supposed to be good for everybody though, but they're not good for you, right?
Yeah.
You like everybody else is going to get this and like this, but it's not good for you, and this isn't for you. And so this idea of being like treated separate, I feel like that's something that we're going to see a lot of in this as well. So I'm really looking forward to how she explores that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is like within that too, like I think it's interesting. One place to start maybe with like recapping the section, getting into the specifics of it, is that it kicks off with the haze. That there's a haze that's descended on this region that's like
Oh no, not a toxic airborne event.
a toxic airborne event. Good point. And she is noted for like in various of her books being like ecologically focused and having like eco
Oh yeah.
sort of vibe to it, right? And there's a comment that she makes somewhere about like, I mean, these people have been fucked by the government forever and survived, but like, how prepared are they for like ecological catastrophes that are going to happen? How much can you rely on anyone as this situation gets worse and worse, given that the government doesn't seem to treat you with any sort of dignity or respect? So like that, I thought that like that framing everything and beginning with this point of like nature is also really interesting. And when you're talking about like the gods or the new gods, and how that plays out, there is that kind of element within the Aboriginal customs of like their relationship to gods and myth, and like that sort of nature being incorporated into that storytelling seems to be both prevalent here, but also in their general history.
Yeah, I mean, just like the first line here after like Oracle One speak, beginning with story.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, for some people in the world,
for some people,
but not so, but not so, like more perfect for others. There lived a culture, dreamer obsessing about the earth. So it's like, yeah, once upon a time, and stuff was great, but maybe not so great for some people.
Yeah, exactly. And that sum is what I circled. That was the first thing I circled, is that sum is doing a lot of work there. And like
yeah.
And this like, runs throughout.
It's like this wonderful humor. And that's really kind of all you have left when everything gets taken away from you. Like, I'll give a great example. I don't know if I told this story or not on one of our episodes, but my wife and I, I wanted to drive through Cheyenne country when we were driving across country.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped at this gas station that was in the Crow Reservation. And it's right by where I wanted to see where Custer got killed, Little Bighorn. I wanted to see what that looked like. Feather in the cap for us. But so we stop at this gas station, and it's like, it's a Indian reservation. It feels like a third world country. It's terrible. And there's this like NPR looking guy driving a Subaru Outback with every bumper sticker known to man on the back of it, and he's like well-to-do. You can tell he's pretty wealthy, and there's just like this like sad long-faced Indian behind the counter, And he goes, how do you say thank you in your language? And the person like looks up like, really, we're doing this? Like, "All right, please, how do you say thank you in your language?" And she goes, "Aho, oh, aho." He takes the receipt. And then behind him is like this 6'5" like Indian in a Pendleton, like waiting to like get his bag of chips. He goes, "Many a hose, my friend, many a hose," and he like waves goodbye. It's the greatest. I want to do something with it one day. It's like this perfect scene of just like, oh great, more white people, love it.
Yeah, awesome.
Can you move, please? I'm trying to get type 2 diabetes here. You're like getting in the way of that for me. Like, it was so good.
Oh,
And it's like right in the shadow of Little Bighorn. Like all this is taking place, but like that sense of humor, right? Like I can sense that in like on the first page here. It's
yeah,
wonderful.
absolutely. I found one that like this is what I named the episode after, and was kind of going to be like probably my line of the week, but I'll find something else. But on page 9, where it's talking about the haze that's descended,
Hmm.
nobody can get rid of the haze. Nobody knows what to do with the haze. The haze is there. So the local people followed up with physicality by having a boxing match with the haze's curse on their kind. The people stood out in the atmosphere, punching their curse, kicked it in the guts, cursed and swore, but nothing. I just love like stood up there punching the curse, kicked it in its guts. Fuck yeah. That's
That's like
sort
a
of
perfect meta. That's a perfect metaphor for life. Like, how's it going? I'm just punching air, you know.
taking this out. Like, that's, that's my yelling at clouds metaphor for the day. But
Piss off, ghost.
there's a lot that comes up in color now that I'm flipping through this too, because there's the point where the guy's trying to get the
50
special
Shades of
grade.
Grey.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
50 Shades of Grey. Like legit.
it was lovely. I loved the imagery on that. Was wonderful. That was a
Yeah,
great section. Yeah.
absolutely. So we have a couple of characters that are introduced here, like Ice Pick, also referred to as Major Mayor. He's Ice Pick because he turned so white. Now a man like this became known as Ice Pick, a kind of more than albino who had covered himself from head to toe in a labyrinth of Casper the Ghost tattoos, mermaids, and octopuses. But you could still see his power blood coursing under the translucence of a spirit man's skin. So you get introduced to him, but he's sort of like becomes I think I'm remembering this right. He's more or less one of the people who's like ranting and like talking about how everything is sort of like needs to go, and is one of like the pontificators that they keep referring to, like the person out there just like kind of spewing forth and talking about, you know, the government and what to do and how to live and get by, and is like big on Twitter. There's like so many Twitter references in here. I love that it's like Twitter too and not X. Like it's just
Yeah.
before that time, so like it's like slightly like a misnomer, but all the references to like the fights on Twitter and the people who are like, oh, I'm telling the truth on Twitter, fucking wonderful, because that is like the world that we live in.
Oh man.
I love that. And one of the things that stood out to me about this whole first section about the haze part, and they're sort of like, what do we do about the haze? How do we deal with this? What are we going to, you know, the government should help us. The government's not helping us. What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. Is a kind of like endless runaround that also feels very contemporary and very like of everyone's time, where it's like, oh, maybe this would happen. And then everyone kind of argues with each other. Everything kind of spirals out of control. Nothing gets done. Everything sort of stays the same, which is pretty interesting too. And like they do refer to like the sort of natural disaster part of it, and then kind of argue about that as well. And like the ineffectiveness of the government in dealing with it, which we all know is like, you know, both true, and nature is a hard beast to contain.
Yeah, it's painted pretty thick. The like the ecology and the like. There's a wonderful image that I really liked, was like people wearing goggles so they could look under the water and see the buildings of Venice. Like that's the way that, like that's the way tourism is going to be going. We're going in this direction. Like that was so cool. Like wow, like yeah, it was such a neat way of looking at it. And the imagery in this is kind of just it feels so foreign. It's really making, at least it's making me like think and look a little bit different than what I normally would.
Yeah.
Um, with the imagery, with the description, even with the like turns of phrases, they're like, it does feel like it's a translation. I see what you mean.
And I think it's a book too that I was finding. I think this happens with a lot of books at the beginning where it's like it takes a little bit to get into. I'm reading it simultaneously a science fiction book from South Korea that I'm using in my class, Counterweight, and it takes like 5 pages, 6 pages of that to like orient to like what is this fucking futurist world that I'm talking about? Like what are the references here? Like what's going on? You need to find like the pacing of it, and then like after I hit a point, it's like smooth sailing, very quick read. This is a book that like even like last night I was reading the last few pages for today's episode. I was like, God, I have to go so slow. I need to slow down.
Yeah,
I'm moving too fast. Missing
the
it.
pace is so. I had to read it so slow. It took me forever to read 60 something pages.
Same here.
Because I felt like, oh, I'll give myself 90 minutes or so. That should be plenty. And it was like 30 pages in. I'm like, what the heck? I was like, how many words? What's the word count per page on here? What's wrong with me? And you just have to slow down because it's so weird. Like, how can it be this dense, but then also that slow? Like it's, yeah.
And it's slow, and yet there's like such a lightness to it in terms of like those jokes and that sort of tenor and the way that certain beats land. Like there's another one that I saw that's very funny. Like there's like kind of like how it'll say something, describe something, go through that something, and then like have like an extra little bit that's kind of a joke that comes out. So where is it? It's a part about widespread planet or widespread or Cosman Steel, all the same names. They're talking about what he wants to do. It's planet. So he was one of the power schemers, trying to like figure out what to do. He said he hustled too many schemes about what other people should be doing and said the word because too many times. Big deal. It's like such a funny like way of depicting the character and then having this sort of like, commentary that's also kind of a joke and addresses the audience and like reflects on what just was said. And I really love that. And then, in all things, his big current plan was to build an empire that was bigger than the Haze that would blow it clean away. And this is where it relates to the idea of like the government and whatnot. Though truth be told, it was easy to see why praiseworthy people thought they were being saved by anyone other than themselves, and why they were sniggering that Widespread's ideas were unpalatable, unthinkable, or in other words, a piece of shit. Since he was always thinking about how he knew best in any given situation but survival, like nobody else is interested in thinking about the indigenous man's preoccupation about surviving in his own country every single day of the last 60 plus millenniums, nor that they did not know that they were already enduring the thing with the big flash name called the Anthropocene. Sorry. Even though they did not know what it was, or could even pronounce the word, or if he had told them that it had something to do with the world ending from man-made overheating of the climate. That is one paragraph, one sentence that goes through all these kind of machinations and deals with both addressing like who would save them, the fact that they've survived for so long and have made it through all these things, the fact that this is man-made overheating of the climate, which is also, horrible and terrible, and is referenced in there. All of this stuff is packed into like one sentence about why people don't trust this character that we've just been introduced to. And the beat of like, or in other words, a piece of shit stands out so well as like a little joke within this like long, difficult sentence with multiple M dashes and various other like twists and turns to it. A traditionally run-on sentence.
Yeah, it reminds me in some ways like when we covered Duck's Newburyport, and like you had to kind of like get used to this different flow and cadence, and then there's almost like a formula that starts. Like you had started finding. I think you got high enough at one point where you started figuring out formulas for. Wait, there's a structure to these run-ons,
and like the negation of things. Yeah.
Like for me, like a great example is on 41. This is a great paragraph. I probably read it fast and I missed it. But you come back and read it again, it's like, oh, okay, this really clarifies stuff up. Like this helps make sense of things. Sure, it was a feed for the Haze. Why not? Make planet the epical supermarket of hate story. The fat haze loomed heavy with story after story being pumped into the air, taking more oxygen than was necessary from the atmosphere. In these stories, widespread feral donkeys became complicated plot lines of everything that had ever gone wrong and praiseworthy from the beginning of colonial oppression, and the symbol of great fallenness, like an ugly fallen angel looming in minds as big as a cyclone. A hostile hurdy-gurdy, bringing everything from thousands of kilometers away, roaring in winds that had no place in the world of the Haze. Like, that's like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, like conk, like that. And like that's just like square in the middle of like, ugh, like how? How are you doing this?
It's really wild. Like, it's really impressive.
It's
Really wild.
it's intimidating. It's like it's really intimidating. Like I feel like you're wrestling a big, like everything in Australia wants to kill you. Like this book wants to kill you too. Like and you got to be like really careful wrestling with it. It's gonna freaking bite you.
Absolutely.
Like it's super impressive that it can be like you said, that light, this complicated, that meaningful, that's deep, like historical, but also funny. And even though I'm confused as hell, I'm finding myself more and more entertained as I'm turning pages.
Same
Uh,
here. Like I
she's
was
doing some like, and she just makes it sound like she's shaking it out of her sleeve. Like it's like, what the hell? How do you do this?
yeah, it feels, and it does have like such an oral quality. There's a book that I always talk about, I use in my class by Adam Thirlwell called The Delighted States. It's about like translation, but like international literature overall and how it influences various people. It's a very interesting book, but like the sort of tone of it is as if you were at a bar with Adam, and he's like, so the whole history of literature is about a wheelbarrow. And you're like, what? And then like 8 beers later, he's like rambling and telling and going all over these places. And you're like going along, and then you get it to the point and you're like, oh, you're right. Fucking is about a wheelbarrow. Totally agree with you. Like, it's that kind of like meandering wide, like just telling,
Yeah.
just sitting at the bar, hitting the shit. So there is like the plot point that comes out of this section, aside from like the Haze's descendant is there, but is that widespread or planet or Cosman Steel, that he decides that what he wants to do is to create a tribe or like a herd of donkeys, because when you can't have like diesel fuels anymore or fossil fuels or cars or whatever, donkeys are going to be like the way to travel. You'd be able to use these donkeys to go golf on that fucking golf course from like hole to hole to hole. You'll need 500 donkeys for that. But so he's trying to get all these donkeys. He's obsessed with this gray color that he has not been able to find in the donkey, but he's getting all of them because that is going to be his like his pyramid scheme, or his way of like creating, like, you know, becoming the first Aboriginal billionaire and like defeat essentially climate change by having his like, you know, fleet of donkeys when we can't drive anymore.
So are you doing for the intro music this season, are you doing Australian bands, or like what do you?
Are there Australian bands aside from In Excess? Zing.
No, just them. Oh, that just takes us back to, now I'm picturing Bluey's dad hanging.
Yep, yeah, me too. And
Yeah. Oh no.
what's going on with Bluey?
There's a band, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
Oh yeah.
And they're really big into, a lot of their songs are like "There Is No Planet B" or like something apocalypse. Like it's always about like the earth melting and stuff. No, what's the band? Midnight Oil.
That's the one that just put in the chat. Midnight
Oil. Midnight Oil, right? White people saving Aboriginals with a song. Yeah.
God, I probably will try and do that. I usually like to use songs I just like, but like this will work for that.
We could do King Gizzard for sure. They've only got about 78 albums, so.
And they have 2 new ones since we started this podcast.
Yeah, I think there's another one since we started this.
They drop podcasts faster than anything I've ever seen. So yeah, so there's all that. That's kind of the scheme that we have so far, or like what's going on. And then the thing that, I mean, there's so many bits to that I think are so funny. So, and the part that like I was referring to, like how the sort of conversation gets all crazy and everyone disagrees with everyone and like nothing gets resolved and everything's like it is in our world where it gets just like stuck in a morass, comes up with this where he's gathering all these donkeys and people are like, we don't want these fucking donkeys here, man. Like, stop it. No donkeys. And then they're like, what about, let's pass a law so that there's no feral animals. And like, but there's some feral animals that we kind of dig, like that pig that everyone refers to as their aunt. We got to keep that. We'll make an exception. We'll make an exception for this. They do all this farce.
We need the shame pig. How else will we make fun of each other? We don't let the pig be around. Yeah.
It's so amazing. And then you get to like this paragraph on 51 that's just brilliant. The town's officials reached out to him. So they said in the end, they're just like, screw it, all the dirty donkeys need to be cleared out of town. The town's officials reached out to Widespread with bucket loads of text messages mentioning their contrivances with fake niceness, then getting down to the tin tax honest, homegrown sour, and nasty barrel loads of insults, canceling him through their social media accounts. They wanted him dead to the world and felt nicely vindicated for having ramped up the importance of their new official bylaws about prohibiting all feral donkeys. He ignored them, and in turn they said, fuck that, all feral donkeys must die. When good people have bothered to reach out in good spirit, they do not expect insults, not at all. These were official local government people, after all, who had gained their positions with bribe votes. They were almost assimilated, not a bunch of idiots. Who did he think he was? Such a good section. And like, I love, there's parts just reading this aloud or reading it with that like with the pacing and letting the pacing dictate your reading instead of like trying to get through a certain number of pages. It's brilliant. This book is brilliant so far. It's really like unique and has a great tone to it.
Same.
Then it really was on page 59 where last night, like I was having these bits, have them marked. They're things I really liked, had like a sort of idea of things. And then it was when his sons get introduced that is like, oh, I am all in. I am totally in now. Like the first one is called Aboriginal Sovereignty, which he didn't want his wife to give him some dumbass like white person name. So
Paul.
Like, he had to insist on the name to save his firstborn from being called something stupid that Dance was scratching from the bottom of the barrel of common English names that Australian white people generally called their children. I think there's one like Paul. Yeah, one Australian type of name for a son like Paul or Pauline if it was a girl. That's so funny. I did think there was a moment in reading this though with this character first, with the Aboriginal Sovereignty, where references that he wears his red baseball cap, and then on the next page it talks about how his dad's like, you need to like is thinking about his son and how he would what he from the outside sees, and that it refers then in inwards or like internally in the son's thinking that involves stuff like being yelled at, the police cars, the pistols aimed at his head, and the intimate fear of running like dogs accused by the state of being pedophiles. And I think that's a really interesting moment where like inside of the kid's head has all these fears of like what would happen with this outside world, with the outside white Australian government world, and like the way that they're being treated. That's really interesting. And the red baseball cap reminded me immediately of Holden Caulfield and his people shooting hat, which then led me down this path of like, who are her influences? Like, you could see things in here, and I want to go read some interviews with her in which maybe she addresses this. In the New York Times one, she mentions Carlos Fuentes and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and James Joyce, which those seem to track beautifully. I mean, the
Sure.
Fuentes book that this most reminds me of is Terra Nostra, which is also like this epic of Mexico and the creation of like the relationship between Spain and Mexico and the indigenous populations, and is like fabulous, super giant, long, wildly told book. And this has that feel, but it's interesting to think about like who would be her influences are going to be a lot of world authors along with Australian authors. And that's very cool too. And you do see like this, the Joyce thing for sure, Gabriel Garcia Marquez for what they refer to as the magical realism aspects, but that kind of blending of myth that Fuentes does, like, it's there. But I'm curious, like, as we go through, like what other sort of like more internationally known authors will we be able to pick out of here? I don't know that Salinger is necessarily one of them, but that kind of set me off down that road. And there's also like those kind of hints of Kafka in the sense of like the bureaucracy is a nightmare and nothing works, everything's like all jacked up. And that's
funny. It's dark and it's funny, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Finding the humor and the absurdity of these big machines crushing individuals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like
And
I
then
love like a great example of that is like on page 60, where we first get introduced to Absol, as he said, as he's called later, right?
yeah, absolutely.
In the middle of page 60, like perhaps his stolen property was somewhere scattered in bits and pieces that were carried away on the back of ants escaping down into their world underneath the ground. Like even that sounds like mythological, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Like the ants have carried it. Like what happened to this thing? Like oh, it's broken into pieces, carried away by ants, and taken underground to never be seen again. Right?
Yep.
Like just like little things like that where it's like sprinkled in. It's like really beautiful and interesting and neat, but somehow feels like rooted in authenticity, even though it feels completely original.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like really, really, really slick.
It's very cool. Then after that, we get to meet Tommy Hawk, who is amazing, who is my
That's gonna
favorite.
be that's my spirit animal so far. Yeah.
Yeah, Tommy Hawk is where it's at.
Give me a fat little kid. I'm all about it. Let's go.
This is the funniest shit that I've ever read. This part where Tommy Hawk, get here, Planet yelled several times to the tubby little brown-skinned boy with golden curls, the 8-year-old youngest son who ignored anyone who did not address him as Jedi or ninja. He did not look Jedi-like, more like a ninja, but just a fat boy, alone to himself, was following his more superior brother, the song of the country, lightness itself, gliding up the street. Planet watched this other heavy unconscious no-show go slow son, a child so unlike himself, and thought back to how he called it when Tommy Hawk was born, as seeing nothing in the baby but a bloody little fascist. That's right. I'm calling you. And that there's a joke involving calling a baby a fascist. Like I'm looking there. And then Tommy Hawk steals it. He wants to get out because there's pedophiles everywhere, which he's become obsessed with the media and the news and like the seemingly more right-wing reactionary sort of news outlets and repetition of this. And that he's convinced that they're like he'll be molested. There's pedophiles everywhere and he needs to get away. And also that his parents are suck because they won't buy him an Apple phone or an Apple iPad so that he can experience the like real world where there's real thoughts and real things happening instead of this nowhere ass place where he's forced to grow up where there's just surrounded by pedophiles.
My line of the week, I'll do it now since we're right there.
Yeah,
It was on 63. It's the top of 63. It's this paragraph here. Fucking Tommy Hawk, Planet Thought, bugger you. Should have let your silly mother name you moron or whatever dumb arse name she would have dredged up from the ditch of the ugliest baby names in the world. He wondered why he wanted to call his kid a good solid name from country like Daruki, which was his real name. Nope, forget it. The kid was not worth it. Father of the year.
There's so many bits of this that are so fun to read. I mean, so many of my favorite lines I've already read out loud, but if I was gonna make one more, I think it has to be this one, just because I think this is representative of life. He saw himself not as a person, but transformed into a door of hatred that went wham, flew open, and wham, slammed shut. Widespread challenge the whole town to bring it on, hate for hate. He pivoted hate, wrapped it, flung the thing, sent a hate bundle in all directions. It was a battlefield, hate flying here and there. Yep, let everything be destroyed. The winner take the flattened moonscape. Who wanted to win anything in this mess? It's like such a fun bit. It reminds me.
Chad identifies with that.
I've been watching the show Beef, and I was like, the first couple episodes, it's on Netflix with like Ali Wong and I forget the guy's name, but he's also a pretty well-known actor. And it's like the minor car road rage incident expands into like basically like fucking each other's life up over period episodes. And first couple episodes, I was like, this could have been my life 1,000%. Like on a bad day, and something happens, I become like laser focused in ruining that human being's life. Like it was like a potential alternate reality biography of sorts. But anyway, so I have to wrap up here because I need to go to another meeting. But I do want to plug too, for anyone who's still listening, that I did post a new article, essay piece on 3%. about Enrique Villamatas and reading and statistics of how many books people read and what the overlaps are and what you would be able to like know of literature, given like how many books there are and how like limited we are in time that we can read. Hopefully people like it. It's up there. It's pretty fun. Anything you want to plug, Brian?
Nothing at all. I started watching that new Shogun show. It's actually really good. So if you want to
I want to
watch
watch
something cinematic, I watched the original one.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that was like in the 80s or something when it came
mm-hmm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
So I did watch that one, but this one's really good. The production value is pretty fantastic. So I had no idea Australians were writing about Japanese, which are directed by, this one actually has a lot of Japanese people involved, so it's cool. They're trying to get some more authentic representation of the book. So it's kind of cool.
And I heard that the kind of white savior character from the original version, his voice is like truly downplayed in this one, and that is more expansive into that world, which I thought was cool too.
He's like a lovable piece of shit. Like he's great. He's multifaceted, so it's really well done.
It's cool. I'm going to check that out for sure. So next week we'll be back, probably on Thursday, but we'll see. And we'll be going up to page 133, which is up to chapter 26. So I think we're still in New Gods. Yeah, we're still in New Gods. So got that. Should be fun. And until then, you can rate, review us, leave comments, tell your friends to listen to the podcast, make us popular. All this stuff helps, and we will see you next week.
Many a hose, many a hose.